Good morning, and welcome to Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church's online worship. I am Rick Kimball, and my pronouns are, he, him, and his. I serve on the worship committee. We would like to thank the Reverend Erica Barron, Unitarian Universalist New England Region Consultant, for leading worship this morning on screen, as well as the weekend startup retreat with the board and committee on shared ministry. Our mission calls us to celebrate diversity, encourage spiritual growth, and promote social responsibility while we travel and care for this earth. Each month, Allen Avenue supports a nonprofit organization whose mission and work aligns with our Unitarian Universalist principle. The Share the Plate organization for October is Maine Unitarian Universalist State Action Network, or MUSIN. MUSIN is a statewide advocacy and public policy network anchored in our Unitarian Universalist faith and animated by its principles. MUSIN links 25 UU Maine congregations and many friends in an active legislative ministry. We have a couple of congregational activity announcements. On Saturday, October 16, A2U2 is holding a community yard sale fundraising. Please read your e-blast for more information or contact Ann Packard or Paula Juno. And we will be holding a cross-generational family dance party outside on October 23rd at 4 p.m. Please contact Reverend Donna or Chelsea Ray for more information about that. We're so glad that you joined us today. And now we will center our hearts and minds with the ringing of the bell.
Bring who you are as you enter our church this morning. Bring your best self and your struggling self. Bring your mistakes and your triumphs. Bring your shortcomings and your recommitment to good. Bring yourself here and open your heart to beauty, to truth. Here in this church, we are trying to walk together on the peaceable way, trying to hammer out division and hatred and all that separates one from another. We try, and we will fall short, but held in love, we try again. We come together this morning as a church to bow our heads in prayer, to raise our voices in song, to remember our promises and vow to live by them again. Words of Sarah Stewart.
Our chalice lighting words are written by Cynthia Flanders. As we kindle this flame, may it spark in each of us connection and commitment to this living tradition and to each other. We move on to our responsive prayer and meditation. It's written by Tess Baumberger. It's called We Travel This Road Together. I ask you to respond to my words with these words: we travel this road together. I will begin. From the busyness of every day, we gather once a week to remember who we are, to dream of who we might become. We travel this road together. As companions on this journey, we share the milestones we meet along the way. Individual moments of joy and sorrow become shared moments of comfort and celebration. We travel this road together. We share this journey across the differences of belief and opinion because we value diversity and because we care for one another. We travel this road together. Today, as we take the next steps Let us notice our fellow travelers, the burdens that they carry, the songs that inspire their hearts. We travel this road together. As we gather in beloved community, let us open the holy havens of our hearts. Let us share the sacred places of our souls, for we are pilgrims who share a common path. We travel this road together.
This reading is an excerpt from the sermon delivered by Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd on Sunday morning at General Assembly in 2016. For as long as two or more have gathered in the name of the Spirit, those two or more have fought some fake fights. You remember perhaps the classic wedding reading from Corinthians, which says, "If I speak in the tongues of mortals or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing." That letter from the Apostle Paul to the early Christian community in Corinth has nothing whatsoever to do with weddings. That's a letter from an overextended pastor with occasionally dubious judgment to a congregation whose leaders were in a constant state of fierce and unremitting conflict. The early Christians in the Corinth congregation were literally shouting their prayers like clanging cymbals on top of one another to try and prove who was better at praying. They were making faith into a contest, and whether he was saintly or not, Paul was having none of it. The collective wisdom of the ages reminds us that the stakes are high, and the ultimate prize we must reach out for in community is greater than the imagined divisions and trumped up arguments that pull us apart. Here's a segue you won't see coming. You know, in WrestleMania, when professional wrestlers have those fake fights, sometimes they really are at risk of getting hurt. And do you know what they do before the muscle snaps or the bones break in a fake fight? They tap out. They bang the mat. When the fake fight gets close to having real consequences, they tap out. I tell you what, I'm tapping out right now, and I invite you to join me. I'm tapping out of every fake fight in our congregations and our movement about getting what I want, or what you want, or what we think we want, because the stakes are too high and we don't have time for fake fights anymore. A fake fight about the bylaws in the annual meeting is most often a carefully concealed real fight about the values that undergird our history coming into relationship with the values that may undergird our future. If we can get past duking it out over the paint color of the church bathroom, we may encounter a pastoral window into the inner life of one whose voice in the world seems increasingly powerless. And all lives matter? Yes, that one, chief among the fights and cover conversations that distract from the work at hand, is not about the slogan. More often than not, it's about our deep and abiding resistance to actually taking on the systemic white supremacy that eats at the heart of us and of our culture. I know for a fact that the real conversations are waiting. Just beneath the surface of the fake fight is the actual encounter, soul to soul and hand to hand, in which change is possible. So let's have that conversation, the real one, the hard one, the one that requires us to keep showing up. And let's do it with edge and forgiveness, calling out and calling in, calling forth a new kind of community, both in our congregations and in the world. The real fight beckons, the real conversation about our history, our identity, our relevance, our resistance. The world does not need another place for like-minded, liberal-leaning people to hang out together and fight about who's in charge. The world does not need a place where you or I, or any of us, are going to get what we want. What the world needs is a movement like ours to step more fully into our higher calling, to serve as an instrument for encounter with one another, with the holy, and with the world, so that we might live more fully and speak more truly and serve with greater efficacy.
Each week, staff and volunteers support religious education programming, spiritual enrichment groups, and a variety of opportunities to create community and offer meaningful spiritual experiences. The funds we receive support all that we do within and beyond this community. Please note, there is a QR code in your order of service that will connect you to the donate button, or feel free to contribute to the basket as it's passed around this room. For our folks on Zoom, please go to our Breeze program or the donate button on our website. Our morning offering will now be gratefully received.
I speak and preach about covenant a lot. Covenant, I say, is the heart of Unitarian Universalism. Our congregations are brought together not by shared beliefs, but by our covenants, the ways we promise to be with each other. Sometimes those promises are written down and agreed upon, I say. Sometimes they are just understood. But the agreement to be together and to commit to our values together, that is what makes a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Usually, when I preach or speak about covenant, someone will comment, "I know you're not talking about marriage, but," and then talk about something they learned about covenantal practice from their marriage or another long-term relationship. And I usually respond, well, I'm not talking about marriage, because I have learned much of what I know about practicing covenant from my relationship with my spouse, both before and since we actually got married. In fact, there is so much here, I thought it might be time to look at it directly, because this is not just me. I think many of us learn the skills and hone the practice of covenant in long-term personal relationships. And then we can bring that learning into the larger covenanted communities we belong to, such as congregations. Now, it's not just marriage, of course. Lots of long-term relationships can teach us how to be in covenant, including long-term deep friendships and long-term romantic relationships that aren't actually marriages, and the relationship between parent and child as either the parent or the child. Your wisdom about covenant might come from these or any other significant long-term relationship in your life. There are days and weeks, months even, when keeping my covenant with my wife is easy. It takes no thought to be grounded in my promises to her, when there are no particular stresses in our life, when we are mostly engaged in activities and conversations centered on the places where we agree, where our preferences align, where we do not experience tension in our ideas about how to live our shared values. These are lovely times, and I am deeply grateful for them, but they are not the times that teach me how to be in covenant. I am not even usually aware of our covenant when keeping it is easy. I'm just aware of my love for my partner, my joy in the awareness of her presence. I hope you experience times like this in your own personal relationships, times of ease and joy and deep alignment. I'm more aware of our covenant in times of tension, stress, and conflict. These are times when the covenant matters, when the fact that I have chosen to make commitments to this person changes what I decide to do moment to moment. I don't know about you, but I was never taught how to fight well. I mean, not really. I was taught how not to fight, let hitting, biting, kicking, etc. are not appropriate responses to conflict in relationships, and neither is being mean with my words, using words to be deliberately cruel. Beyond that, I think the only skill I was deliberately taught for actively navigating conflict before I was an adult was compromise. In other words, I get some of what I want, and you get some of what you want. We try to make things fair, often in a pretty mathematical way. The conflicts I faced as an adult have mostly been too complicated for the simplistic tool of mathematical compromise to solve. And some of my childhood conflicts were more complicated than this too, if I'm honest. I've encountered many other tools that people use to try to navigate conflict as an adult. You might recognize some of these tools that you've learned yourself or have had used on you. One tool is continued reliance on mathematical compromise. This tends to make every conflict, sometimes every interaction in a relationship, an entry in some imagined ledger of debt and surplus. And conflicts are solved by asserting debt and exacting payment, or less often by admitting indebtedness and offering concession. Another tool is the logical argument. Conflicts are won by asserting that the emotional needs of the other parties to the conflict are insignificant or failing to notice them altogether, and by hiding one's own emotional needs behind a veil of reasoned argument. This usually comes with an inability to notice and tend to one's own emotional needs as well as the others. There are so many others. Emotional manipulation, which usually works by making the other feel guilty until they give you what you want. There's remaking the rules, in which the standard being applied to any given situation is always the one that benefits you. My favorite tool for much of my life was withdrawal. Allowing the other person to win this conflict by getting what they want, and then letting the other person win every conflict, always getting what they want, until the day I decide that continued negation of my own wants and needs is not worth it. And this is followed by a more decisive withdrawal in the form of ending the relationship. And then I met Rachel, the woman who would become my wife. I had finally come to the end of my own willingness to disappear my own wants and needs in a relationship. And I did not want to withdraw from my relationship with Rachel. I became committed to her, to connection with her, to building a life with her, and to a real equal partnership between the two of us. And that meant we had to learn to go through conflict within the context of our commitment to each other. We didn't do this very well at the beginning. I know that I used the tactic of saying whatever will be the strongest argument to get my way early in our relationship. I think I used the logical argument tactic too, and the mathematical compromise. And there were some truly absurd fake fights, as Nancy MacDonald Ladd calls them. Fights that were about small, mundane things, which covered far deeper fears and insecurities for both of us. And yet, we still wanted to be together. So we had to learn to do better. And gradually, with the help of a couples counselor, we did. The details of that process were unique to us, of course. For me, though, the thing I learned by engaging conflict in my primary relationship was how to bring my most important values and commitments into conflict. I value fairness. That means I have to apply the same standards equally in a conflict. I can't change the rules of engagement whenever it suits me. I value honesty. That means I need to acknowledge when my partner says something true that is hard to hear, and it means I have to admit it when I'm wrong. I value equality. That means I can't get my way all the time, but I also can't give way all the time. Most of all, though, I value this person, my partner. And because I love her, I want the way we go through conflict to move us toward each other at the end of the day, rather than pushing us apart. To do that, I need to be transparent, to show her what is really going on for me, which means I need to figure out what's really going on for me. My experience of fake fights is that they don't feel fake when they are happening. We might sometimes be aware as it's happening that the fight about where we spend Christmas is actually a longing for a particular relationship to our families of origin that has changed, or that a fight about how we arrange the kitchen is really a fight about whether we feel like we matter in the household. But usually, for me, it takes stepping back and pausing to check in with myself before I can find the real pain, fear, or shame behind the fake front. Practicing my covenant, my commitment to my wife over the course of years, has made it easier to notice when I'm getting angry about something that is not the real thing. It has made it easier to stop before I say something just to win and decide to say something more vulnerable. It has made it easier to stop when she hits on something true that I hadn't considered, to take it in and to let it change my mind. I do not do any of this perfectly. That's why I think of it as practice. Author T. Thorne Coyle says that practice makes possible. I love this reframing so much because we are never perfect, but it is true that the more we practice something, the more possible it becomes. Like practicing an instrument with dedication will widen your range or increase your accuracy or allow greater subtlety and expression. Practicing engaging in conflict as fairly, honestly, and lovingly as I can has made deeper relationship possible and allowed for the healing of some of the pain behind the fake fights. The staff of the Unitarian Universalist New England region, my team, has been thinking about the practices that Unitarian Universalist congregations can engage to live more fully into our collective purpose of creating justice, equity, compassion, and liberation within our congregations and in the world. We have focused on 5 practices, and covenant is one of them. Within congregations, we sometimes think of covenant as a thing, a set of promises we write together and which we remind ourselves of, hopefully, at regular intervals. I know in my experience as a Unitarian Universalist lay leader and minister, I often thought of our congregational covenants as quite fragile. As a set of promises, they could be broken, and regularly were, whenever we failed to live up to a perfect ideal of what those promises mean. Maybe it was this seeming demand for perfection that led to the other thing I regularly experienced: covenants languishing in drawers and files, never made alive in actual interactions in the congregation. So the idea of covenant not as a thing, but as a practice, not something we make, but something we do, has been an important shift in my thinking. In congregations, we make commitments to each other and then we practice them. Sometimes this is easy. Sometimes there is simple joy in a community doing good work together. But just as in my marriage or in any other long-term relationship, there are also moments of tension, challenge, and conflict. And then we have to practice our commitments to each other. Covenant as a practice feels much less fragile than covenant as a thing, at least to me. When I imagine covenant as a set of promises, in my mind's eye, I see it as a glass vessel, beautiful, capable of holding whatever I need it to hold, but only until it is inevitably broken. Covenant as a practice feels more like maintaining my house. There's always a to-do list. Small things break or need attention pretty much all the time, but the structure is sound. And the more I work to fix things, small things, the more I learn about how to take care of the structure. I also know when there is a big thing that I need help with. And the house stands through all of this. In the fall of 2019, when we on the regional staff convened a covenant, In the fall of 2019, we on the regional staff convened a learning community to reflect on covenant together for a year. The community was made up of teams from 6 congregations who wanted to dive deep into the practice of covenant. We got together 4 or 5 times to learn from each other and explore the ways covenant was being practiced in each congregation. As we talked with the members of the learning community, we on the staff started to notice something. We began to hear an assumption that conflict and covenant are mutually exclusive states. No one quite said this directly. It was such a foundational assumption that we could only hear it peeking out in the way we discussed conflicts in congregations. If we are in conflict, then we are not in covenant. The covenant has been broken, or else we would not be in this conflict. Once we noticed this and began talking about it directly, I realized that I held the same assumption for most of my time in Unitarian Universalist congregational life. If we are in conflict, especially a difficult one, we must be out of covenant. But in the context of my marriage, I know that when we are in conflict, that does not negate our commitments to each other. In fact, in conflict, my covenant with my partner becomes more important. Our agreements about how we will be together matter most in moments of tension and struggle. So the same can be true for our congregations. Conflict, in and of itself, is not a sign that covenant has been broken. It is rather a moment to pay close attention to the ways we have promised to treat each other, to the values that we hold. Our Unitarian Universalist principles are actually a covenant that Unitarian Universalist congregations make to each other to affirm and promote certain values in our congregations and in the world. Our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Our second is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person means putting down a lot of the tools for navigating conflict that we may have learned along the way. It means putting down the tool of simply disappearing from conflicts because we have inherent worth and therefore the right to be heard, listened to, understood, and considered. It means putting down the tool of saying whatever you need to win an argument, because those with whom you are arguing have inherent worth and therefore the right to be heard and listened to, understood, and considered. Practicing justice and equity means putting down the tools of emotional manipulation and changing the rules, neither of which are fair. Compassion means putting down the tool of mathematically calculating compromise, since that does not look deeply enough at the real needs of everyone in the conflict. Similarly, the logical argument will not help us to be more compassionate with each other. We practice our covenant by bringing our whole selves, as honestly as we can, to our conflicts in our congregations, by being as fair as we can to those with whom we disagree, by seeking the true needs and wants behind our positions on any given question, and by looking as well for the needs and wants of others behind their positions. We will mess up, but the more we practice, the more becomes possible. Practice makes possible. Practice makes it possible to move through conflict to resolution that honors everyone's inherent worth and dignity, an agreement centered in justice, equity, and compassion. Like all the things we have to practice, perfection is neither starting place nor goal. When we make mistakes, we can acknowledge them and try again. Practice makes our covenants strong structures for our collective life, which hold us even when we tend to the places that need mending. Practice makes possible. So let us continue to practice our covenants in our own relationships, in this congregation, and the covenant between congregations, in our relationship to the world around us. What wonderful things will be made possible by dedication to our covenants? Let's find out. Our benediction words are by George G. Brooks. May the love that gives to life its beauty, the reverence that gives to life its sacredness, and the purpose that gives to life its deep significance be strong within each of us and lead us into ever deepening relationships with all of life. Amen.
We extinguish our chalice to words by Amy Zucker Morgenstern. When we take fire from our chalice, it does not become less. It becomes more. And so we extinguish our chalice, but we take its light and its warmth with us, multiplying their power by all of our lives and sharing it with the world. Blessed be.